"I told you, Marlene," I said through clenched teeth, my breath fogging in the icy air. "This lake isn't yours." Her heels dug into the frozen surface as she lifted the citation like a queen delivering a death sentence. "Oh, but it is now." Those words echoed across the lake, swallowed by the cold, like the world itself paused to listen. My fishing rod lay beside me, abandoned in a moment that felt strangely cinematic, me on a stool, her standing above like an ice-coated gargoyle. The sun hadn't fully risen, but its weak winter glow stretched long shadows over the white surface. If someone had snapped a photo, it would have looked like the world's pettiest showdown. I could almost hear the narrator voice in my head saying, "This was the moment everything went to hell. And okay, maybe that's dramatic, but you try dealing with an HOA president before sunrise in sub-zero temperatures." Back then, I still believed winter was my quiet season. The world turned softer, slower, hushed under the weight of snow. But that morning shattered any hope of peace. Marlene Whitford had marched onto my frozen lake like she owned the ice, the sky, and possibly the concept of joy itself. I had barely drilled my fishing hole before the click, click of her heels cut through the silence, a sound so unnatural on ice it made every hair on my arm rise. "Mr. Walsh," she announced, voice tight and sugary like someone who'd never been told no. "You're in violation of HOA Regulation 18F. Ice fishing is prohibited without board approval." I blinked at her. "Regulation what? When did that exist?" She smirked. "As of last night, it passed unanimously." Of course it did. The board was basically her personal fan club. I stood slowly, the cold biting my fingers. "This lake isn't HOA property. Actually," she said, adjusting her fur collar. "It sits within community boundaries. The lake existed before the community existed." She waved the citation. "Boundaries move. Lakes don't." Her logic was incredible, bold, wrong, and delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted herself in her life. The moment she left, heels tapping like a villain's theme song, the rumor mill kicked in at full speed. Within 2 hours, 3 neighbors accidentally walked past my house, peering at me like I'd murdered a snowman. By noon, someone posted online that I was hoarding natural resources. By dinner, a teenager had messaged me asking if I was planning to drain the lake. Marlene worked fast. The next morning, a neatly folded letter appeared on my porch HOA letterhead. Perfect margins, printed on paper that smelled expensive. That's how you know you're dealing with true suburban madness. The stationery alone says, "I'm ready to ruin your life." The letter read, "Notice of unauthorized use of shared water feature." Shared water feature. My jaw literally dropped. Shaw Lake had been in my family since 1962. My father fished here. My grandfather swam here, and my dog still considered it his personal drinking bowl. And suddenly, according to Marlene, it was a community amenity, like a decorative fountain. I marched down to the HOA office, a repurposed model home, decorated with fake plants that somehow looked angry. Marlene was at her desk, sipping some kind of overpriced herbal tea. "Ah, Mr. Walsh," she said with fake warmth. "Hear about yesterday." "You know exactly why I'm here," I snapped. "Shaw Lake is private property." She tapped her nails on the desk, each click a little more irritating than the last. "Our updated map includes your lake within our jurisdiction." Updated by who? The board? When? Last month, I leaned forward, and were homeowners informed? She smiled. They didn't need to be. That was the moment I realized Marlene wasn't confused. She wasn't mistaken. She was plotting. Every suburban villain has a motive, and Marlene's was simple. The HOA Winter Festival. Every year, they hosted their big event, a parade of twinkling lights, ice sculptures, and lukewarm cocoa. But this year, she wanted something new. Something dramatic. Something that required a perfectly pristine frozen lake. Mine? I walked out of that office with my blood boiling and my fingers numb. And the thing about anger in winter is, it hits harder. It feels colder, sharper, like the season itself is leaning in to listen. 2 days later, the situation escalated. I woke to the sound of voices outside my house. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw 3 neighbors grouped together, clutching phones, whispering feverishly. One pointed at the lake, another pointed at me. "Morning," I said. They scattered like startled rabbits. Inside the mailbox was another envelope thicker. This time, inside was a violation letter, a fee notice, and a printed screenshot of Marlene's latest message board post. A resident has been conducting unsafe and unauthorized activities on community ice. We cannot risk injuries or lawsuits. The board is reviewing penalties. She didn't even use my name. She didn't have to. That evening, while the sky turned pink behind the bare trees, I stood at the edge of the lake and let the cold burn my lungs. The ice groaned beneath the snow, shifting with the temperature. I whispered, "Fine. If you want to fight, you'll get one." Because underneath that perfect winter stillness, cracks were forming thin, invisible fractures spreading in every direction. And not just in the ice. In the neighborhood. In the HOA, and in Marlene's carefully curated little kingdom. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The real break, emotional, legal, and spectacular, was coming fast. Faster than the next cold front. "I don't care how loud you shout, Marlene," I said, my voice cutting through the buzzing crowd. A lie doesn't become the truth just because you printed it on fancy HOA letterhead. Her smile twitched, and for the first time, I saw the crack beneath her polished exterior. People didn't know it then, but that moment, the silence, the stare, the tension thick enough to taste, was the spark that would set the whole neighborhood on fire. The meeting room smelled like burnt coffee and cheap pine air freshener, and every folding chair creaked as residents leaned forward. Eyes darted between us like they were watching a courtroom drama instead of an HOA meeting. 24 phones were recording, because nothing says community spirit like neighbors preparing to upload your downfall. And Marlene? She stood there with her clipboard like it was a royal decree, relishing every second of her audience. If dramatic entrances and theatrical pauses were an Olympic sport, she'd already have her gold medal. But before we reached that confrontation, the night had started with a much more ridiculous opening act. The emergency HOA meeting notice arrived on my porch like it was a summons from a medieval king. Red ink, bold lettering. Words like mandatory and immediate compliance scattered across the page. It was scheduled for 6 o'clock in the community center ballroom, which wasn't actually a ballroom, just a room with bad lighting and chairs that bit into your spine. When I arrived, the place was packed. People huddled in thick coats, their breath still clinging to them as they found seats. The smell of wet boots and peppermint gum filled the air. Christmas lights blinked along the walls, trying and failing to soften the tension. Marlene stood at the front, wearing her signature power coat, clipboard in hand, hair sprayed tight enough to withstand a hurricane. "Thank you all for coming," she said, pretending this was a noble gathering rather than a witch hunt. "We have a very serious community issue to address." Whispers rippled across the room like wind through snow-covered branches. She clicked her pen dramatically. "It has come to our attention," she began, "that a resident has engaged in repeated violations involving unsafe conduct on community property." Community property. She waited for gasps, and oh, she got them. She held up a photograph, me on the lake, leaning over an ice fishing hole. It wasn't even a bad photo, honestly. I looked outdoorsy and calm, not like the villain she wanted me to be. But she projected it on the screen behind her, as if I'd been caught dumping barrels of toxic waste. "This," she said, tapping her clipboard for emphasis, "is a clear violation of Regulation 18F. Additionally, unauthorized modification of a shared water feature can lead to property damage, liability claims, and increased insurance costs for all of us." I raised my hand. Modification. It's a fishing hole, not a construction project." A few people snickered, and Marlene shot them a look sharp enough to slice ice. She launched into a list of fabricated violations: trespassing, endangering residents, disrupting wildlife patterns. She even claimed someone's dog had slipped because of ice instability caused by drilling. Meanwhile, the only dog on that lake was mine, and he was about as graceful as a refrigerator on roller skates. Then came the real bombshell. "If this behavior continues," she said, raising her voice with dramatic flair, "the board may pursue financial penalties, liens, or necessary action to protect community assets." "Hold on," I said, rising from my seat. "You're threatening a lien against private property you don't own." She turned toward me like a hawk spotting prey. "The lake falls within HOA jurisdiction." "It doesn't," I fired back. "And you know it." Gasps again. Phones angled to get a better shot. Marlene seemed ready for that moment. She flipped to a page on her clipboard and held it up triumphantly. "The updated community boundary map clearly places Shaw Lake inside our managed area." I took a step forward. "Your updated map is 3 months old. My deed is 60 years old." Now, people were whispering for real. Confusion, concern, curiosity. The perfect mix for a suburban meltdown. I pulled from my coat a folded document, the original plat map. Printed decades before Lakeview Meadows was even a sketch on a developer's desk. I held it up so everyone could see the handwritten note from the county surveyor marking the lake as private. "This," I said, "proves the lake was never, has never been, and will never be under HOA control." A few people murmured. Others stared at the map with wide eyes, like ancient scripture was being revealed. Marlene's smile stiffened. "That document is outdated," she snapped. "So is your authority," I replied. And that's where we returned to the opening standoff, me calling out her lies, her facade finally flickering. But the chapter wasn't done. Because just as the room seemed ready to turn against her, Marlene regained her composure. She straightened her coat, tapped her clipboard once, and said, "Regardless of history, the board voted unanimously that community safety outweighs personal claims. We will continue to regulate the lake as necessary." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. She had doubled down, and then she dropped her final threat. Effective immediately, Marlene announced, all winter activities involving the lake are suspended. This includes fishing, skating, and any festival preparations. Till further notice, Shaw Lake is closed. People gasped. Kids groaned. A few parents glaring at me, not at her. She turned to me with the most self-satisfied smile I had ever seen. "If you want the lake open again, Mr. Walsh, you'll need to work with us. Cooperate, cooperate." Meaning, surrender. Before I could respond, she adjourned the meeting and swept out like a monarch. Neighbors clustered in groups, whispering, pointing, wondering what came next. I clutched the plat map in my hand, the edges digging into my palm. I had proof, I had facts, and now I had a line Marlene had dared me to cross. The real battle was about to begin. I had no intention of losing the next round. They canceled everything. Every single event. "Yes," I said calmly. "And they can thank Marlene for that." The room went silent, heavy enough that I could practically hear the snow falling outside. People weren't talking, they were staring. At me, at each other. At the freshly posted notices taped crookedly on the clubhouse wall, announcing the shutdown of the winter carnival. The snowshoe derby, even the annual chili cook-off that Marlene bragged about like it was the Olympics. It was like the entire neighborhood forgot how to breathe at the same time. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. This was the last thing they expected from the guy who usually kept to himself on the edge of the lake. But chaos has a way of revealing exactly who's been pulling the strings. It had all started that morning, when I stepped outside with a thermos of coffee and saw a cluster of neighbors gathered around the main bulletin board. Their breath puffed in little clouds as they muttered, eyes flicking wildly across the notices. The sky was a pale, icy blue, and the sun bounced off the snow with blinding force. I could smell pine, cold air, and something else, nervous energy. I hadn't planned on making a dramatic appearance, but when people turned and saw me, they swarmed. What happened? Why would you cancel the carnival? Is this about the lake? Is Marlene behind this? That last question made a few others flinch, like speaking her name might summon her. I held up a hand, trying to keep my voice even. I didn't cancel anything. The HOA did. Or rather, I took a sip of coffee. Marlene triggered it. A collective gasp. You'd think I'd just confessed to sinking the Titanic. The truth was simple. Marlene had pushed her luck one too many times. After the emergency HOA meeting where she paraded her fabricated violations and tried to intimidate me with talk of fines and property seizures, I'd gone home, sat at my desk, and opened the file I never wanted to use. The one labeled HOA Overreach in case of emergency. And believe me, this qualified. Inside were the documents proving the lake was never HOA property. Deeds, surveys, county records. Emails from the developer himself confirming the water rights belonged to me alone. I had everything I needed. Before sunrise, I'd sent a formal notice to the HOA board. Effective immediately, the community's access to my lake was revoked until further review. No fishing, no skating, no events, no exceptions. And since all their winter activities depended on the lake, well, the dominoes fell fast. By noon, Marlene's perfect winter calendar had collapsed. While the neighbors crowded me outside the clubhouse, demanding answers, the smell of cinnamon rolls drifted from someone's open door. The whole street buzzed with whispers. People rubbed their gloved hands together, unsure whether to be angry or impressed. What did she do? One woman finally asked, cheeks pink from the cold. I'll explain everything very soon, I said. And I meant it. But not yet. Not until I had the whole board present. Not until every resident could see exactly what had been happening behind closed doors. Not until the truth hit with maximum impact. I walked away, leaving them shivering in a mix of frustration and intrigue. By the time the emergency town hall meeting was announced, this one called by Marlene herself, word had spread faster than frost on a window. I showed up early, taking my usual seat near the back, the one with a clear view of the entire room. The clubhouse smelled faintly of peppermint and radiator heat. People packed in shoulder to shoulder, winter boots squeaking on the tile floor. Scarves still around their necks as though they were too afraid to get comfortable. Then Marlene swept in. Her stiff posture, brittle smile, and sharp eyes radiated tension beneath her navy coat armor. Residents, she began, voice sugary but cracking at the edges. I called this meeting to address the unfortunate disruptions caused by a certain homeowner's actions. Dozens of heads turned toward me, noticed, and pressed her lips together. This individual, she continued, has taken unilateral steps to interfere with community events and access to shared spaces. I laughed out loud. It slipped out before I could stop it. A few people startled. Marlene's eye twitched. That lake isn't a shared space, I said, standing. It never was. Her cheeks went red. Please refrain from interrupting. Then please refrain from lying. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Snow slid off the clubhouse roof outside with a low, rumbling thud, adding to the drama like nature itself wanted better acoustics. I have documentation, I said, pulling a folder from my jacket. Official records proving the lake is privately owned, not HOA property, not communal land. Mine, Marlene's breath hitched so sharply I heard it across the room. Several neighbors whispered behind gloved hands. A man near the front muttered, I knew it. Marlene recovered, or tried to. Even if that's true, your actions are punitive and disruptive. You're holding the community hostage. I'm protecting my property, I replied. From you, the room exploded into chatter. People stood. Chairs scraped. Someone accused another of lying about something unrelated. proving that panic spreads like fire. Marlene pointed a trembling finger at me. "You're making a mistake. You don't understand the consequences." "Oh," I said softly. "I understand them perfectly." That shut everyone up. I stepped forward, placing the folder on the table in front of her. "And in the next meeting, I'll show all of this to the entire neighborhood. Every file, every email, every overreach. So you might want to prepare." She stared at the folder like it might bite her. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen lake. Inside, no one moved. And then, right as the tension reached its breaking point, someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "What happens next?" I smiled. "You'll see."